Greetings. It's a special honor for me to be part of this year's commemoration on Yom HaShoah. After the horrors of the Holocaust, the international community vowed never again to let another genocide take place. Never again, they said, but never again soon became again and again. My name is Eloge Butera. I'm a survivor of the 1994 genocide against the Tutsis. 26 years ago, over 1 million Tutsis were murdered in only 100 days, in a genocide that was not only preventable, but also predictable months before the massacres began on April 7, 1994. Had the international community cared to see or cared to act, in the words of Professor Irwin Cotler, we knew, yet we did nothing. My father and many other members of my family were among those killed, and I survived by running and hiding in bushes, barns, and later in someone's house. I was 10 years old the night the genocide began. I vividly remember gruesome sights of violence, and I remember feeling a profound sense of abandonment. My family, fleeing for its life, was turned away, and nobody would help us, nobody would hide us, even those whose lives my father had saved as a medical doctor, even those whose children my aunt had helped educate, even those whose weddings my grandfather had officiated. Even the United Nations, whose makeshift refugee protection system was at capacity by the time we arrived, and who later abandoned us almost entirely to our horrific fate. I also remember fear. I remember the distinct smells of a country transformed into a massive killing field. The haunting sounds of squads of ordinary people, armed with machetes, out hunting for unarmed Tutsis who were hiding, like me, wherever they could. I remember sounds of innocent people begging for their lives, the sounds of executions, other sounds of suffering and terror that my brain could not make sense of. How did Rwanda descend into this hell? A sustained campaign of hate, propaganda that dehumanized and humiliated Tutsis over many years was the first step towards genocide. When our teachers referred to us as the cockroaches in classrooms, or the public media called us all snakes, it was not the first time a community was the object of hate and singled out as worthy of extermination. Jews had known that over many centuries. In fact, Hutu extremists in Rwanda drew from the Nazi playbook. They drew up their own version of the Nuremberg Laws, which they called the Hutu 10 Commandments. They refined their propaganda machine to weaponize millions of Rwandans in a genocidal killing machine. In my visit to Poland, I was shocked by the industrial scales of the Nazi factory of murder. Thousands of kilometers of rail tracks whose ultimate destination was a gas chamber or a concentration camp in which murder was also dispensed through extreme hunger and cruel labor conditions. I also felt a special connection to the thousands who never made it to the ghetto, to a train, or a concentration camp. They were murdered by killing squads, Einsatzgruppen, in forests not far from their homes. They were marched through their villages with their neighbors looking on, and they were murdered and buried in mass graves in small villages throughout Eastern Europe. Many of those holy sites Today are in lush forests whose beauty is irreconcilable with the barbarity and the violence that took so many lives. To me, this part of the story is unfortunately very familiar. The cruelty of those murders drove home the lesson that every murder during the Holocaust was personal. It has been pointed out before, the Shoah was not only the killing of 6 million Jews, they were killed one by one by one, 6 million times. As we light the memorial candles today, we remember the lives lost. We also remember those who resisted the Nazi regime, many of whom paid with their lives. Personally though, the most lasting impact has been the courage and resilience of survivors like Robbie Wiseman in Vancouver, a dear friend and mentor who was born in Skarżysko, Poland and liberated from the Birkenau concentration camp. Robbie, like a number of other young boys, were taken to France and assessed by psychiatrists after the Shoah. He and his friends were told that they had seen too much and would amount to nothing. Yet they went on to become leaders of industry, a Nobel Prize laureate, and a former chief rabbi of Israel. Their courage is inspirational. They rebuild their lives, modeling amazing resilience personally and professionally. Many of them have also lived as amazing example of social engagement, confronting injustice in all areas, some as civil rights leaders and others as advocates of genocide prevention, trying to hold to the critical promise of never again. On this Yom HaShoah, we honor and celebrate the survivors' courage. We thank them for the lessons, and we renew our promise never to forget, never to observe from the sidelines, never to let anti-Semitism or any other kind of hate run its course unchallenged. May the memory of their loved ones be a blessing, and thank you for listening to my story.